Years after falling ill, my wife and daughter returned with intentions to take over my house. But let's go back to the beginning. Initially, I received a diagnosis of advanced Hodgkin's lymphoma, a surprise considering my active lifestyle, healthy diet, and regular doctor's appointments. The oncologist couldn't pinpoint the exact cause, and with slim chances of survival through rigorous therapy, I was determined to fight. Sitting down with my wife of 15 years, Daisy, and our teenage daughter, Luna, I broke the devastating news to them. Reassuring them of my commitment to combat the disease, I couldn't shake worries about the impact on our family dynamics. The doctor had warned that chemotherapy would be debilitating, mentioning that many marriages don't survive such treatments. That night, I shared my concerns with my wife, Daisy, who promised unwavering support through sickness. Financial stability from good insurance, savings, and a trust fund eased concerns about our fully paid-off house and Luna's college education. A week later, chemotherapy began, taxing my strength. Returning home drained and barely able to manage daily tasks, my wife and daughter stepped in, assisting with meals, housework, and transportation to appointments. 2 grueling months passed, and signs of agitation from my family emerged. Reluctance grew when I asked for help, and my daughter stopped responding to simple requests. The breaking point came when, running late for an early chemo appointment, my wife suggested I take an Uber due to her fatigue. Calling an Uber and the hospital for assistance, the driver was kind, ensuring my safe arrival. Grateful but disheartened by relying on strangers, I returned home to a troubling situation. Confronting my wife and daughter about their behavior, I sensed a chilling demeanor. I asked if they considered me a burden, and with a heavy sigh, my wife admitted feeling overwhelmed. My daughter timidly confessed she hadn't expected me to be so needy during my illness. Realizing it was time to discuss potential solutions, we began a difficult conversation. I proposed the idea of hiring a nurse to assist me a few days a week with daily tasks and accompany me to chemotherapy sessions, anticipating the days when I would be too weak to manage on my own. To make things more convenient, I ordered a wheelchair. Thankfully, my wife and daughter agreed to this plan. Seeking recommendations from the hospital, they sent a nurse who struck a balance between sweetness and sternness. She ensured I never missed a chemo appointment, received medication on time, and crafted a comprehensive care plan, including healthy meals. Despite these efforts to ease their burden, my wife and daughter remained discontent. My wife felt threatened, thinking the nurse was replacing her. I suggested that if she took on the responsibilities of driving me to chemo, filling prescriptions, and ensuring I ate and took medication on time, we could part ways with the nurse. Reluctantly agreeing to this compromise, my wife insisted on finding a male nurse, but I explained there were none on the recommended list, and the current nurse had specific experience with cancer patients. I made it clear that the nurse would only be replaced if my wife and daughter were willing to shoulder her responsibilities. Unhappy with this proposal, my wife argued that I should do more for myself instead of making my condition everyone else's problem. I tried to reason with her, explaining the toll chemotherapy took on my body. In a fit of rage, she stormed upstairs, slamming doors. Choosing to ignore her tantrum, I focused on my recovery. That night, I received a call from my mother-in-law, expressing displeasure about bringing another woman into her daughter's house. Though the house was technically in my name, I explained the necessity of the nurse due to the level of assistance I required. I emphasized that the nurse's presence would be temporary, lasting only for the remaining month of chemotherapy, provided the cancer didn't persist or worsen. While she seemed unconvinced, she eventually left me alone. For about a week after that conversation, things seemed relatively normal as my treatment progressed smoothly. Then, on one fateful day, after returning from a chemotherapy session, a moving truck greeted me as I arrived home, my wife and daughter having packed up their belongings and informed me they were going to stay at their mother's place. Deeply hurt and upset, exhaustion held me back from expressing my feelings properly. The timing of my wife's departure, right after my chemo sessions when she knew I'd be utterly spent and unable to communicate effectively, felt cruel. Seeking clarity, I turned to my daughter and asked if this was truly what she wanted. Her response hit me hard. She said she would rather live with her mother because she found it too difficult to live with me. It was a painful moment watching them leave, tears welling up in my eyes. It was precisely what I had feared when my chemo journey began, feeling unwanted and abandoned. In the midst of my emotional turmoil, my brother stepped in with a solution. He noticed the nurse spending extra time with me that day and inquired if I had any family members nearby who could provide support. Though my brother lived 3 hours away and had 2 young children of his own, he generously offered to take time off from work to stay with me until I could find a more permanent arrangement. Upon his arrival, he was furious about what my wife had done, referring to her as selfish and ungrateful. He pointed out that she had never had to work since our marriage, and I had always ensured she lacked nothing. His time off from work was limited, but he had another suggestion. His wife's sister, Kara, was going through a painful divorce and needed a safe place to stay temporarily. Her soon-to-be ex-husband had been the breadwinner, leaving her with limited financial resources. Kara was also studying radiology at a nearby university on scholarship, and my home was conveniently closer to the university campus, making it an ideal solution. Agreeing to the arrangement, I assured my brother that Kara wouldn't have to pay rent since she'd already be putting up with me. My wife and daughter had taken almost everything, leaving only the bed and a few dresses. My brother stayed the rest of the week, and Kara arrived on his last day. He helped her move in, and she expressed her gratitude for letting her stay with me. Kara promised to be considerate, clean up after herself, and assist where needed. In the weeks that followed, things went relatively smoothly. I missed my wife and daughter, but it appeared that I was the only one feeling that way because they didn't even bother to call or check up on me. Kara's presence proved to be a tremendous help. She took care of grocery shopping, handled most of the cleaning, and even assisted with meal preparation. Throughout this time, she never uttered a single complaint. About a month and a half after my wife's departure, I received the news that I was cancer-free, a momentous occasion celebrated by ringing the bell at the hospital. My nurse asked me now that I was essentially cured. My immediate decision was to file for a unilateral divorce, freeing myself from a marriage that had proven unsupportive during my challenging journey. With the divorce proceedings in motion, my focus shifted toward the next crucial step, recovering from cancer. Slowly but surely, I began to regain my strength. My hair grew back, my scars started to heal, and I was putting on weight, while sticking to my healthy meal regime for the most part. I allowed myself some cheat days to savor the favorite meals I had missed during my illness. It's been 6 months since I've been declared cancer-free, and I believe I'm finally ready to move on with my life. I made a call to my old job, and they're willing to rehire me for remote work if I choose to return. I think I'll take them up on the offer because I'm planning to move away. While I have an attachment to my house, there are too many painful memories here. I yearn for a fresh start with something smaller. My wife doesn't know it yet, but I'm planning to give the house to Kara. She came through for me when I was at my lowest, showing immense kindness even though we were practically strangers. She's free to sell it if she wishes. I no longer want anything to do with it, especially if it means my wife or daughter could lay claim to it. My new place is in a quiet neighborhood in the countryside, and I'm eagerly looking forward to this new beginning. Update number 1. Hey wife and daughter. It's been over a year since my initial diagnosis, and I've settled into my new place and neighborhood nicely. There are plenty of friendly folks around here, and I've made friends with my neighbors, including Sophia, who lives across the way. She's a widow who lives alone, with her kids scattered across the country, visiting only during Christmas and her birthday. Sophia invited me to her porch for drinks and conversation, and she shared the heartbreaking story of losing her husband to lung cancer. She emphasized how important life insurance was for her family's financial security. During our conversation, I opened up about what happened with my wife and daughter. Surprisingly, I still hadn't heard a word from them, but I've come to terms with it. I've been spending my time pursuing new hobbies, particularly woodworking, and I'm starting to build up a collection of tools. One day, when I returned from the hardware store, Sophia informed me that she had noticed some people hanging around my house. Fortunately, they didn't do anything harmful or steal anything, but they did approach the door, knock a few times, wander around the house, and eventually waited in their car. Sophia considered calling the sheriff's office, but decided against it, thinking they might be family. I asked her to describe them, and her description matched my wife and daughter. I couldn't fathom how they had found my new residence, as only my brother and his wife knew my current address. It left me wondering why they were looking for me after leaving almost a year ago without looking back. Sophia assured me that if they returned, I shouldn't come out, and she would handle the situation. Frankly, I had no desire to interact with them after they abandoned me. During my lowest point, later that night, I called my brother, who informed me that my wife and daughter had been harassing Kara and her roommate at my old house. Fortunately, Kara had documented proof that the house was now in her name, and she had explained that she had bought it for me, a smart move on her part. I felt bad that Kara had to go through this ordeal because of my family, so I called her directly to apologize. Hopefully, the next time they come around, I can resolve the situation for good. As for my wife, I'm not sure if she's aware of the unilateral divorce. My lawyer sent a copy to her mother's house, but it's possible they mistook it for junk mail. Regardless, I've reached a point where I no longer care. She and I are no more. Update number 2. My wife and daughter showed up at the house again, but this time it was earlier in the day while I was working. I heard the knock and decided to check the security cameras, and sure enough, it was them. My ex-wife looked just as I remembered her, but Luna had grown significantly. She was practically a young woman now. I followed the plans Sophia and I had discussed, staying inside but moving closer to the door to hear them better. Sophia, ever the good neighbor, came over to greet them and introduced herself. My wife asked if she knew a man named Charlie who used to live there. Sophia sounded just as baffled as I was and questioned her use of used to. My wife explained that her husband, not ex-husband, had lived in this house before his recent untimely death following an extended hospital stay. My jaw hit the floor at this revelation because, to my knowledge, there was no record of my death anywhere, especially not at the hospital where I underwent treatment. My wife went on to claim that they were the next of kin, implying that the home was rightfully theirs. Sophia informed them that someone named Charlie did live there for a while, but clarified that he was a divorcee. She also shared that during our time as neighbors, I had informed her that my wife had left me, and I had filed for a unilateral divorce. Sophia added that, as far as she knew, I intended to bequeath all my assets to charity, since I had no other family besides my brother. This was why she found it strange to see 2 women snooping around my house. The conversation fell into an uncomfortable silence before Sophia inquired if they had a death certificate or a will. They replied in the negative. Sophia explained that once they had those documents, they could take them to the county's record office. If they were indeed the rightful owners of the property, they could then get the deed in their name. My wife did not take kindly to this suggestion. She asked Sophia who she thought she was and started screaming, asserting that Sophia had no authority to interfere in her affairs. She also accused Sophia of being nosy and demanded that she mind her own business. Feeling a deep sense of embarrassment, the people in this neighborhood had been nothing but kind to me, and here my ex-wife was making a scene and disturbing their peace. Part of me wanted to go out there and give her a piece of my mind, but I chose to stick with our plan. Sophia, bless her heart, apologized to them and explained that she was merely trying to be helpful. She returned to her own home, and shortly after, my ex-wife and daughter left. After finishing work, I went over to Sophia's place to apologize. She brushed it off, mentioning that while she found my wife's behavior repulsive, she also found the outbursts somewhat amusing. I wished I could agree with her, but I knew my wife could be hot-tempered when upset. If she ever returns, I am determined to confront her and ask her to leave me in peace. She came back again yesterday. I was sitting in my home office when I heard a loud crash. Rushing out to the living room, I found my front window smashed and people were outside screaming. I thought there might be a maniac on the loose, and it turns out I wasn't entirely wrong. It was my ex-wife. She had smashed my window, and my neighbors were out there trying to stop her. Apparently, she had been causing a ruckus for a while, but I hadn't heard it because I had my noise-canceling headphones on while doing some QA work. Frankly, I wouldn't have heard her even if I hadn't paused the music for a break. When I got outside, two of my elderly neighbors were doing their best to restrain my ex from causing more damage. Both she and Luna were holding bats, and they had already broken a few of my potted plants. I grabbed her by the arm and asked if she had lost her damn marbles. Needless to say, she was shocked to see me, or rather, shocked to see me alive. I told both her and my daughter to get off my property before I called the cops. Unbeknownst to me, my neighbors had already placed the call. She seemed hurt by my words and asked why I hadn't contacted her after I got better. She insisted that she and Luna would have come back. I told her that when we got married, we made vows to stand by each other in sickness and health, and she broke those vows. I wanted nothing to do with her anymore. She's no longer my wife. I sent the divorce papers months ago. I asked her again to leave. Then she asked about her daughter and mentioned that she's going to college next year and she can't afford the tuition on her own. I replied, "Your daughter was fine with abandoning me too, and I'm ready to give up all my parental rights to you. You should have thought of that before you abandoned me. I don't want anything to do with either of you." After hearing that, she went from upset to angry, calling me selfish and heartless, which I found rather amusing given the circumstances. "You're the last person who should be calling anyone selfish." I screamed back, called her an entitled jerk, and made it clear that I'd ensure she never got a dime from me again. Then she swung at me with a bat just as the cops showed up. They immediately arrested both her and my daughter. They asked if I wanted to press charges, and of course I did. My ex and daughter started crying loudly as they were loaded into the back of the police car, but I felt no sympathy for them. I had everything that happened on camera, including my wife smashing the window, and I had already submitted it to the police. After work, I ordered a new window and cleaned up the glass. Someone will be coming to deal with it tomorrow, but for now, a rigged-up tarp is keeping out the elements. Sophia gave me some buckets to put my plants in until I can replace the pots. Curious about what had brought my ex-wife back, I did some digging. It turns out her mom passed away 2 months ago, and they found out that the house they had been staying in didn't belong to her or her husband. It belonged to his cousin. The cousin decided to kick them out because he wanted to sell it. With both of my ex-wife's parents now gone, she and her daughter sold most of their parents' belongings and had been living in a motel for a while. When they came back to our old home and saw Kara there, they assumed I had died and went snooping around for recordings of my assets and purchases, which is how they found me. Regardless, they're facing charges of vandalism, attempted break-in, and attempted assault. Since Luna is a minor, she's receiving community service, but my ex-wife is facing time behind bars, as this was clearly premeditated. I'm considering obtaining a restraining order as well. At least for now, I won't have to worry about her for a good long while. The evening air crackled with tension, a prelude to the storm brewing in our living room. "What do you mean she's moving in tomorrow?" I asked Greg, my voice barely containing the shock and anger. Greg didn't even flinch. "It's decided, Elise. Mom's coming to live with us. It makes sense, especially now," he replied calmly. "How can you make such a decision alone?" I countered, feeling the walls of our home closing in on me. "What about our plans?" Greg had that all-knowing look, the one that always set me on edge. "We'll convert your home office. It's the only logical solution," he said, seemingly dismissive of my concerns. "My office, Greg. That's my space, my sanctuary," I protested. "You don't really need it," he said, brushing off my objections. "Besides, I pay the rent here, $3,000 a month. That gives me a say in how we use the space." I was stunned. This house, the one my parents had passed down to me, now felt alien, controlled by Greg's financial hold over it. "But this is my family home. I whispered more to myself than to him. Greg's voice was cold, devoid of the warmth I once fell in love with. Your family home or not, I'm the one footing the bills now. Get your stuff cleared out by tomorrow. That night, I couldn't sleep. The realization that our marriage was a facade built on the shaky grounds of financial power and silent submission hit me hard. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my office being emptied. Marian, Greg's mother, arrived with her suitcases, an unwelcome guest in my own home. In the days that followed, tension escalated. Marian's presence was overbearing. She rearranged the kitchen, criticized my cooking, and worst of all, subtly belittled me in front of my daughter Mia. Greg became more distant. Our home, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now echoed with unspoken resentments and forced politeness. One evening, I overheard Greg and Marian discussing finances. Elise doesn't contribute much anyway, Marian scoffed. She should be grateful we're letting her stay. I felt a surge of anger. This was my family home, a place of cherished memories, now being reduced to financial transactions and power plays. The next morning, I confronted Greg. I want to talk about the rent, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. This was my family's home. I never agreed to pay rent. Greg's response was a mix of arrogance and indifference. Well, things change, Elise. I'm paying the bills, so technically it's more my house than yours now. That was the moment I knew our marriage, a delicate balance of love and compromise, had crumbled under the weight of control and disrespect. I called my father, Nolan. Dad, I need your help. It's about Greg. As I hung up, I realized that this was just the beginning. I wasn't going to let Greg and Marian turn my life into their dominion. They might have underestimated me, thinking I'd crumble under their control, but they were wrong. I was my father's daughter, and I knew a thing or two about standing my ground. Sitting in the empty room that used to be my office, I couldn't help but reminisce about the early days with Greg. We were like two pieces of a puzzle, fitting perfectly with our differences. But now, those differences were tearing us apart. I remembered our first date, how Greg's laughter had echoed in the autumn air, how he had looked at me as if I was the only person in the world. It was hard to reconcile that memory with the man who had just usurped my family home. My phone buzzed, pulling me back from the past. It was a text from my father, Nolan. I'll take care of it. Meet me at the shop tomorrow. Nolan's auto repair shop had been a staple of my childhood. It was more than a business. It was a testament to his hard work and dedication. That shop, much like our family home, held memories of a life once filled with warmth and togetherness. The next day, I walked into the familiar scent of oil and metal. Dad was under a car, his hands expertly moving as he worked. Dad, I called out. He slid out, wiping his hands. Elise, let's talk in the office. The office was a small room filled with trophies from car shows and framed photos of our family. It was a capsule of happier times. Dad, I can't believe Greg is doing this, I said, frustration evident in my tone. Dad's eyes reflected a mix of anger and concern as he listened. I know, Dad, I replied with a heavy sigh. I think it's time for some payback. Dad nodded, a determined look crossing his face. What do you have in mind? I want Greg and Marian out of the house, but I want to do it legally, I explained. I want to make them feel the pinch of their actions. Dad leaned back in his chair, pondering. We can draw up a rental agreement, hike up the rent, make it impossible for them to stay. I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. This was the first step in reclaiming my life, but it also meant declaring war on Greg and Marian. Let's do it, I said, surprising even myself with the resolve in my voice. Over the next few days, Dad and I worked on the rental agreement. It was a meticulous and strategic plan designed to legally corner Greg and Marian. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, imagining their faces when they'd see the new terms. Meanwhile, back at the house, Marian's true colors began to show more vividly. She complained about everything from the way I dressed Mia to the brand of coffee I bought. Her words were like needles, subtle but piercing. One evening, I overheard her on the phone. Yes, I finally got a lease under my thumb. This house will be ours soon. Fury and disbelief coursed through me. How could she be so callous, so manipulative? But her words also steeled my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting Mia from this toxic environment. The day came to present the rental agreement to Greg and Moran. I walked into the living room, the document in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. "Greg, we need to talk about the house," I said, my voice steady. He looked up, surprised. "What about it?" I handed him the document. "It's the new rental agreement. You need to read it." As Greg's eyes scanned the pages, I saw a range of emotions flicker across his face: confusion, disbelief, and finally, anger. "This is absurd. The rent's been raised tenfold," he exclaimed. "Yes," I said, meeting his gaze. "It's the market rate for this property. If you can't afford it, you'll have to find somewhere else to live." Greg's face turned red, his anger palpable. "You can't do this to us." "I can, and I am," I replied, feeling a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. "This is my family home, Greg. You've forgotten that, but I haven't." The days following the presentation of the rental agreement were a blend of silent battles and open confrontations. Marion's true nature, once hidden under a veil of polite intrusion, now emerged in full force. One evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, Moran entered the kitchen. Her eyes quickly scanned the room, landing on the simple yet nutritious meal I had prepared. "This is what you call dinner?" she scoffed. "Back in my day, we knew how to provide for our families properly." I clenched my teeth, forcing a polite smile. "It's healthy, and Mia likes it." Marion snorted, dismissing my efforts with a wave of her hand. "Children don't know what's good for them. It's up to us to teach them. Clearly, you lack that understanding." Her words stung, but I remained composed. I had learned that reacting to Moran only fueled her disdain. As the days went by, Marion's presence became more oppressive. She criticized my parenting, my housekeeping, even my choice of clothes. It was as if she was deliberately trying to provoke me. One afternoon, I returned home from a quick errand to find Mia in tears and Marion sitting calmly in the living room, reading a magazine. "What happened?" I asked, rushing to comfort my daughter. "Your child is just being fussy as usual," Moran replied without looking up. "I don't have the patience for such nonsense." I held Mia close, feeling a surge of protective anger. How could she be so cold towards her own granddaughter? Later that week, I had a meeting with a potential client for my small business. "Marin, could you please watch Mia for a couple of hours?" I asked, hoping for a bit of cooperation. "Fine, but make it quick. I have plans later," Moran replied with annoyance evident in her expression. I returned from the meeting to find Mia once again in distress. Moran was nowhere in sight. After calming Mia down, I confronted Moran. "Where were you? I trusted you to look after her." "I had to step out for a bit. She was sleeping anyway. What's the big deal?" Moran rolled her eyes. The big deal was that Marion's selfishness was now affecting Mina, my most precious treasure. I realized then that Marion would never change. Her contempt for me had spilled over to Mina, and I couldn't tolerate it any longer. I called my father that night, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and determination. "Dad, it's getting worse. She's not just targeting me now. She's neglecting Mina." Nolan's response was swift and resolute. "We need to speed up our plan. It's not safe for you and Mia there anymore." The following day, I saw Greg and Moran whispering in the living room, their heads close together in conspiracy. "What are you two plotting now?" I asked, my voice edged with hardness. Greg looked up, feigning innocence. "Just discussing some financial matters. Nothing for you to worry about." But I knew better. The rental agreement had unsettled them, and now they were scrambling. I could almost smell their desperation, a scent that, under different circumstances, might have been satisfying. Instead, I felt a cold resolve settling in my heart. They had underestimated me, thinking I would crumble under their pressure. But they were wrong. I was ready to fight back, not just for myself, but for Mia. Every day in the house felt like walking on a tightrope. Marian's presence loomed large, a constant source of negativity. Her comments were like thorns, pricking away at my patience and resolve. One evening, as I put Mia to bed, I'd overheard Moran speaking to Greg in hushed tones in the living room. Elise is not fit to be a mother. She's too soft, too indecisive. You need someone who can actually run a household efficiently. I stood frozen, listening to their conversation. Greg's reply was a weak agreement, a betrayal that cut deeper than any of Marian's sharp words. The next day, I confronted Greg. "Do you really think I'm a bad mother?" I asked, my voice shaking. Greg avoided my gaze. "It's not just about being a mother, Elise. It's about being responsible, about being adequate." The word echoed in my mind, a stinging indictment of my role in this family. As the days passed, Moran's manipulations grew bolder. She rearranged the furniture to her liking, disposed of items she deemed unnecessary, and took over the kitchen, effectively pushing me to the margins of my own home. One day, I returned home to find Mia crying inconsolably, while Moran remained in the kitchen, completely ignoring her distress. "Why aren't you attending to her?" I demanded, my heart racing with worry. Marian shrugged, a cold detachment in her eyes. "She needs to learn to soothe herself. It's part of growing up." That night, I called my father, my voice a mix of anger and desperation. "I can't do this anymore, Dad. Greg and Moran are destroying everything I hold dear. I need to get out." Nolan's response was immediate and firm. "You and Mia come stay with me. We'll sort this out." I hesitated. Leaving the house meant giving up the fight, but staying meant subjecting Mia and myself to more torment. The decision crystallized the next morning when I found my personal belongings boxed up in the garage. Marin had decided they were cluttering the house. That act of violation was the final straw. I packed our essentials, taking one last look at the home that had once been a haven of love and happiness. As I closed the door behind me, a sense of relief washed over me. I was leaving behind the oppressive walls of that house, but I was also stepping into the unknown. Staying with my father brought a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. Mia's laughter returned, filling the house with joy. But the battle was far from over. I met with my lawyer to discuss the divorce. "I want full custody of Mia," I stated firmly, "and I want the house back." The lawyer nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We'll build a strong case. You have rights." As the legal proceedings began, I realized this was more than just a divorce. It was a fight for my identity, for my daughter's future, and for justice against the tyranny of Greg and Moran. Greg's reaction to the divorce papers was a mix of shock and anger. "You're making a mistake, Elise. You won't win this." But I was resolute. I had tolerated, endured, and sacrificed enough. It was time to reclaim my life and protect my daughter from the toxic environment Greg and Marian had created. The divorce proceedings were a cold, calculated dance of legal maneuvers and emotional confrontations. Greg's shock at my decision to leave quickly turned into a bitter determination to fight back. As the legal battle ensued, my resolve hardened. In the midst of this, my father and I finalized our plan for the rental agreement. It was a strategic move designed to legally compel Greg and Moran to vacate my family home. One afternoon, I arrived at the house to deliver the new rental terms. Greg and Moran were waiting, their expressions a mix of defiance and curiosity. I handed Greg the document, watching his face as he read through it. His eyes widened in disbelief. "This is ridiculous. You're increasing the rent to an exorbitant amount." "Yes, Greg," I replied calmly. "That's the market rate for a property of this size and location." Moran interjected, her voice shrill with panic. "You can't do this to us, Elise. This is our home." "No, Moran," I countered, standing my ground. "This is my family home. You and Greg have made it clear that I'm not welcome here. So, if you wish to stay, these are the new terms." Greg slammed the document on the table, his anger palpable. "We'll fight this. You won't get away with it." But behind his words, I sensed his fear. The realization that they were losing control was dawning on them. As I left the house, a bittersweet feeling enveloped me. I had taken a significant step in reclaiming my home, but the sight of Mia's abandoned toys in the living room reminded me of the personal cost of this battle. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal appointments and emotional upheaval. I clung to Mia, her innocence and love my anchors in the storm. During one of the hearings, Greg's true colors came to the forefront. "Elise is unstable, Your Honor," he claimed. "She's not fit to be a sole custodian." I listened, my heart pounding, as my lawyer countered his baseless accusations with evidence of my stable income and loving relationship with Mia. In a subsequent meeting, Greg's lawyer proposed a settlement. Greg is willing to relinquish his claim to the house in exchange for joint custody and a reduction in the rent. I hesitated, torn between the desire to end this battle and the need to protect Mia from Greg and Marion's toxic influence. But then, I remembered Mia's tears, Marion's callousness, and Greg's betrayal. This was no longer just about winning a legal battle. It was about justice and setting an example for my daughter. "I refuse," I said firmly. "I will not compromise on Mia's well-being or my family home." The decision to continue the fight was a difficult one, but it was necessary. I was no longer the woman who tolerated disrespect and manipulation. I was fighting for my rights, for my daughter's future, and for the dignity that Greg and Marianne had tried to strip away from me. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready for whatever came next. The day of the final confrontation arrived like a storm on the horizon. Armed with the legal documents, I stood at the doorstep of what used to be my sanctuary, now a battleground. Greg opened the door, his face a mask of defiance, Marianne hovering behind him, her eyes betraying her anxiety. "What do you want, Elise?" Greg asked, his tone icy. "I'm here to finalize the arrangements," I said, handing him the updated rental agreement. As he read, his expression shifted from confidence to disbelief. "This is absurd. You're demanding a rent that's beyond unreasonable. It's the market rate," I replied, my voice steady. "If you can't afford it, you'll have to vacate." Marianne stepped forward, her voice trembling. "You can't do this to us. We have nowhere else to go. That was your choice when you decided to push me out of my own home," I said, meeting her gaze. Greg slammed the document on the table. "We'll see what the court has to say about this. You're not going to get away with trying to evict us from our home. This ceased being your home when you chose to disregard my rights and my feelings," I retorted. The air was thick with tension, the once familiar living room feeling like a foreign land. Memories flooded back, of laughter, of love, of a life that once was. Now, it was just a shell housing bitterness and betrayal. As I turned to leave, Marion's voice stopped me. "Elise, please, we can negotiate. There must be a way to resolve this." I paused, considering her words. Then, with a resolve that surprised even me, I said, "There's nothing left to negotiate. You made your decision when you chose to side with Greg against me and Mia." With that, I walked out of the house, leaving behind the echoes of a life that no longer existed. The days that followed were a mix of relief and uncertainty. The legal proceedings were grueling, but my resolve never wavered. Eventually, the court ruled in my favor. Greg and Marianne were given a month to vacate the property. The news hit them like a tidal wave, washing away the last vestiges of their control and arrogance. As I stepped back into my family home, now empty of their presence, a sense of peace enveloped me. It was not the peace of victory, but the peace of justice served. I walked through each room, reclaiming the space that had once been ours, mine and Mia's. The walls that had witnessed so much pain now stood as silent sentinels to a new beginning. I knew the road ahead would be challenging. There would be wounds to heal, memories to reconcile. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope. I had fought against the odds, stood up to the tyranny of Greg and Marianne, and emerged stronger. This was more than just a legal victory. It was a reclaiming of my life, a testament to the strength I never knew I had. The dust had settled, the legal battles were over, and the once turbulent house was now calm. As I stood in the empty living room, the memories of what had transpired echoed in the silence. Maya played in the corner, her laughter a balm to my weary heart. Watching her, I realized that this struggle, though fraught with pain, was necessary. It wasn't just a fight for a house. It was a battle for our future, for our peace. The day Greg and Marianne left, I saw a glimpse of realization in their eyes, a dawning understanding of the consequences of their actions. Marianne looked back at the house, her expression one of loss and regret. Greg, defeated and subdued, didn't meet my gaze. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I returned to my small business, finding solace in the familiar routine and the support of my regular customers. Mia thrived in the newfound stability, her resilience a testament to the strength of our bond. One afternoon, as I was closing the shop, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was Greg. He looked different. The arrogance had left his eyes, replaced by a certain humility. At least, he began awkwardly. I wanted to apologize for everything. I listened, a mix of surprise and skepticism. "Why now, Greg?" He sighed, a deep, weary sound. Losing the house, the divorce, it made me realize how wrong I was, how much I lost because of my pride and my mother's influence. I considered his words, the years of pain and struggle flashing through my mind. "Your apology doesn't change what happened, Greg, but I accept it for Mia's sake." Greg nodded, a look of relief passing over his face. "Thank you, Elise, and I'm sorry, truly." As he walked away, I felt a chapter of my life closing. Greg's apology didn't erase the past, but it offered closure, a finality to the turmoil we had endured. In the months that followed, I renovated the house, turning it into a home once again. The walls were repainted, the rooms refurnished, and new memories were made. It became a sanctuary for Mia and me, a place of healing and growth. I'd often sat on the porch, watching Maya play in the yard, reflecting on our journey. The challenges had been immense, but they had also revealed the strength I never knew I possessed. I had stood up against injustice, fought for my rights, and reclaimed my life from those who sought to control it. It was a journey of self-discovery, of learning to trust in my own strength and resilience. In the end, this was more than just a story of revenge. It was a tale of empowerment, of rising above the trials and tribulations to forge a better future for myself and my daughter. The house, once a battleground of conflict and manipulation, was now a haven of peace and hope. It was a reminder that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most rewarding victories. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the yard, I held Mia close, grateful for the journey that had brought us here. We had overcome, we had triumphed,